Okay, today we're talking about how to make you stand out as a thought leader in your space and really create a cult-like following to those people that follow your thought leadership. My guest today is Josh Kopel. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corkin here. I'm the host of this show, and you know, if you've listened before, that every week we talk to interesting CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of different companies. If you check out the archives, we've got Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activision Blizzard. Lots of great episodes. Go check them out. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise25, our company where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn all about that in our new tool, Podcast Copilot, at rise25.com, or you can email us at support@rise25.com. All right, my guest here today is Josh Kopel. He is a Michelin awarded restaurateur and entrepreneur and the founder of Flow Hospitality Solutions, which is a company that leverages technology to improve customer service experience in restaurants. He's also the host of a podcast, a Full Comp podcast, and also creator of the Restaurant Marketing School resource that provides digital marketing tips for restaurant owners. And it also has been the president of the California Restaurant Association, which is an interesting role as well. So we'll ask about that. But you know that I always like to start people off by telling us what they were like as a kid. And Josh, you started out at 13 years old in the sweltering heat of southern Louisiana, just selling fruit from your cousin's fruit stand, which I imagine may not have had air conditioning. What exactly was that like?
That was miserable. But I'll tell you what it did do. It did a great job of like benchmarking what hard work was. I wish I was selling fruit. I was the guy that was unloading and loading the trucks. And during pumpkin season and watermelon season, especially for being small for my age, it was a lot. What I learned through that process, which served me really well in my entrepreneurial journey, is just because it hurts and you feel like stopping, it doesn't mean you should. There's a lot of data now that proves it, but like there's a muscle in your brain, like this thing that if you work on it around grit and resilience, it'll get better. And that experience in my formative years was great fodder for that.
Your father was a traveling salesman, and we don't hear about that type of role much anymore. And how much of that grit did you learn from observing your father?
A lot. I think a lot of entrepreneurs would say this, that, we're all inspired by our parents in both positive and negative ways. My father was an excellent salesperson, excellent. But he didn't enjoy his job. So it was this interesting parallel of seeing someone that was amazing at what they did for a living, best in the world, and hated it every single day. And so
we see that so often, don't we? Because I think maybe it comes naturally to them, maybe, or they're just naturally good at it, so they're more drawn to something that they're not as good at.
I think that certain predilections lend themselves to certain things. What he liked was the safety and security of like working for and with companies. So he never struck out on his own, even though there were certainly times in his life that he had the opportunity. But he was so good with people. And like he could connect with people in a really human way. The best advice he ever gave me was he said, if you sell yourself, they will buy whatever you put in front of them. And few things have proven true without exception throughout my life, more so than that.
We'll get into that when we talk about the thought leadership, starting a podcast and all that kind of stuff, because I think that's relevant in there. You actually you also sold uniforms at a uniform store? Tell me about that.
I did. And that's when I realized that attempting to become best in the world doesn't make you popular. I can remember I got that job. It was the first legal job I had ever had. I was 16 at the time. I was working at the uniform shop part-time. And I remember this moment where the other salespeople crowded me in the employee locker room and they said, you need to calm down. You need to just chill out. Like, no one needs to work this hard. It's not that big of a deal. Like, just chill out. And I didn't have that in me.
Yeah, it's
And
funny because as we talk about that right now, you and I think we both get that they're jealous or they felt like you're setting the bar too high
that's
for
exactly what
them.
it was.
Right. Did you get that though at 16? Did you realize that's what was happening?
I, God bless my mother. My mother instilled me with just an incredible amount of confidence to the degree that, like, I figured if someone had a problem with me, but I thought I was doing world class work, it was probably on them. And for me, it wasn't a popularity game.
Mm.
Now, granted, what we're here to talk about today is the popularity game. But the way you get to the top isn't the way you stay there.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so I was relentless. I was ruthless in my pursuit of excellence from my very early age.
And
it served me well.
this uniform, I think there was a story around the founder of this uniform store.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you were to ask me today, what is the most critical element of success when it comes to sales? It's consistency and execution. And this came from a man named Ernest Damp, who I am sure died a very long time ago. But in his 80s, and this was in the early 90s, at 80 something years old, he came to speak to all of us. And this was
This is while you were at the uniform store?
This was like the orientation for the uniform store.
Okay.
80-year-old man walks in with Parkinson's, stands in front of everyone and says, "This is a true story." And I was young. Everyone else in the room was young too. Totally inappropriate, but spot on. He goes, sales is like standing on a street corner and asking every woman that walks by to sleep with you. You're going to get slapped in the face a lot, but every now and then you're going to get laid.
You're 16 and this guy tells
I'm
this
16,
80-year-old
and this
man
guy
with
is half
Parkinson's.
dead. But he's right. Like, what makes you successful in sales is the consistency and execution. It's understanding that no's are part of the process. And it laid fertile ground for what has been, a successful career.
Wow. Did the uniform store business lead to the clothing line that you eventually founded, Local God Clothing? Or
did.
Unrelated?
It's completely unrelated. I then got into, the first time I walked into a bar, I was 17 years old. Everyone was looking at the girls. I was looking at the bartenders going, "Oh my God, I want to do that."
Because they're kind of the gatekeeper. They're in charge. They're the gods in the
I saw
bar.
a stage. I saw a platform. I saw a place where nobody could immediately become somebody.
Was this like a Coyote Ugly bar type of thing, or what was it about?
Yeah, it was. I mean, not exactly that. The bartenders weren't dancing on the bar, but it was a stage, and they were performers. And the energy that stemmed from the bar and the bartenders is ultimately recreated the energy that everyone else got to enjoy. And I saw that and I wanted that. I didn't just want to be a part of that, but I wanted to wield that. I wanted to host those parties. And that was my entree into hospitality.
Yeah. And so you eventually get into managing nightclubs, right?
I do. In Hollywood in the early 2000s.
Okay. Crazy time.
Wild. And what I realized is that the model for nightclubs could ultimately be adjusted for different purposes. And so I asked myself at the time, and I wasn't an entrepreneur, I said, what is something that I could do that is relatively low cost, where I could leverage the relationships I have for a better outsized outcome? And I knew every celebrity on the planet. Everyone came to this nightclub and to the other ones. And so I had this amazing network. So I made shirts, which looking back weren't great to begin with. But I turned to all of these celebrities and I said, "Will you wear these clothes?" And they said, yes. And then I photographed them in the clothes. Now, understand, they're not in stores. You can't buy them. But then I signed up for a trade show for like $1,500 in Las Vegas. And in there, all I had was a rack of these samples and photos of celebrities wearing the clothes.
Okay.
Flash to record-breaking sales for a company that had no inventory. And we launched through Barney's New York and Kits in LA, which is unheard of. Those are aspirational brands when you start a clothing line.
What was different about, was there anything different about the product itself, or was it just this is basically early influencer marketing before everyone had even using that term?
Yes. So what we did was every shirt had a screen print on it. You remember the early 2000s.
Oh yeah, there wasn't a high point for t-shirts for
No,
sure.
it certainly wasn't.
Yeah.
And every shirt had a story screened on the inside of it.
Story screened on the inside of it. Oh,
Right. On the
interesting.
inside of the shirt, they told the story of why we made that shirt, what the images on the shirt meant. And so it did a couple of different things. Number one, when you look at t-shirts in general, it's a commodity business.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did was we went to every Barney's New York that was carrying the clothes in the first 30 days. We gave the entire staff clothing and we walked them through the stories on the inside of the shirts. Because how do you sell a commodity? You need a differentiating factor.
Yeah.
So instead of saying all of these shirts have screens, pick the one you like best. I'd say, check this out. This is the story behind this shirt.
Yeah.
So in giving salespeople the tools they needed to sell, we were able to sell through across the board, which ultimately led to 8,000 doors in 7 countries nationally over the course of 2 years.
Wow. That's crazy, crazy growth.
Oh,
there must have been some challenges along the way. You alluded to it didn't have any supply. What were some of the biggest challenges to keep up with that growth?
It was supply chain. I mean, and this is the pattern throughout my career is I get into things I know very little about, and then I've got to learn rapidly. Marketing is my core competency. I understand what people want because the only people I sell to are people exactly like me. Unfortunately, I am as average as they come. So what I like, most people like. So I'm able to play the averages that way. Supply chain was an issue. It is a tight margin based business. And ultimately, it was so hard to tell whether we were making money or not, because the way you pay is not the way you get paid. And so all of the vendors you work with are net 7 or COD. But like once you hit the big boys like we do, Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom, Federated. Like
they expect 60-day terms, 90-day terms.
Maybe. Bro,
really
if
a lot
they
longer.
tell you 60 days, they'll see you in 120. And they're going to send back all of the clothes that didn't sell.
So you have a cash challenge.
You do.
Yeah,
so there was constant cash crunch.
Yeah.
And so 4 years in, the financial crisis happened.
And we're in 2008 here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I had a choice. I could either sweat myself in a bar at 4:00 in the morning, or I could be at a screen printer in downtown Los Angeles at 4:00 in the morning. So I decided to get back to my roots. I saw a hole in the market, especially with the economic downturn. And so I opened a dive bar and I licensed the clothing line and used that money to finance a dive bar in Hollywood.
Oh, wow. All right. Before we get too far away from the managing nightclubs, what was the craziest? Give me a couple crazy stories of managing nightclub stories.
So this is the early 2000s, and it is just wild times. If you can imagine, this is the area of Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan and the Simpson sisters and the Duff sisters and all of these people. Quite possibly the greatest night. There are some funny, sad stories in there, but I'll tell you about the greatest night of my life. As a young man from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I am like 22 years old, running an 8,000 square foot nightclub in Hollywood. I mean, just the dream of all dreams. And Justin Timberlake had just released his first single. And at the time, we had this like live drum performer that had this gigantic drum set that like he would like jump up and slam the cymbals. It was this whole thing. Then he played along with the DJ.
Okay.
And I'm talking with that guy. He's not performing at the time. And I'm standing on the stage and I'm looking out. And it's every celebrity you could imagine. And like the guys from that 70s show and everyone is there. It's an amazing time. Everybody's having an amazing time. And Justin Timberlake's new single comes on. And all of a sudden, I hear the drums, the guy performing the drums. But the guy that's performing the drums is standing right next to me. So who's performing on the drums? Timberlake? It was Justin Timberlake. He had come through the back entrance and was performing to his own song. And so in a 20-year-old's mind from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, it was just surreal.
Yeah, that's nuts. He seems like a deliberate guy. Like he would have like orchestrated that somehow. Or do you think it was just total coincidence? Like he happened to be there, heard it, and then just hopped on the drums.
It was just, he was there every Tuesday like everyone else. I still don't know how he snuck on the stage. But funny. It was crazy.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So you end up selling the oh, there was also a Paris Hilton story. Is there a Paris Hilton story?
Yes, back when Paris Hilton was dating the other Paris, her boyfriend, when they were leaving the nightclub one day or one evening, they ran over my head of security. Literally,
Ouch.
he
Jeez.
rolled over the hood of the car as they were trying to escape the paparazzi.
Oh crap. Wow.
Trip.
That's nuts. All right. So you end up the license. You said you licensed uh the clothing
Clothing
line
line.
in order to fund your first bar. So you're moving out from managing bars to managing your own bar, owning your own bar and managing it. What was that
Exactly.
transition like?
It was great. I mean, it's, like people that experience early success, you become a victim of your own success. So the story gets worse and harder as you go.
Yeah.
But I saw a pain point in the market, and it was this mixture of these nightclubs with this exclusive access and all of that paired with when you think about Hollywood, the bar was on Hollywood Boulevard. You think about tourists, but what
Yeah.
I saw as a local was that this is a densely populated residential area. And more than anything, and you hear about it on the news today, these people are transplants. Me too. And they're
Mm-hmm.
lonely and they're
Mm,
seeking connection. And what I love most about the bars I grew up in is that you could go by yourself. The bartenders would befriend you and they would introduce you to other people.
mm,
And so, in creating that and creating inclusivity instead of exclusivity,
mm,
we developed a cult following and the bar made a fortune from the day it opened.
mm. So the kind of the opposite of the clothing line.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. The opposite of the clothing line, the opposite of the nightclubs. It was an entirely new thing. And what was
Was
a
it?
market that was desperate for it?
I'm curious because, in my career, I've gone from the high of highs to the low of lows. I think a lot of us have, right? I
Sure.
mean, I worked at the White House and then a few years later I'm in law school where I'm just one of many, right? And just nose to the grindstone type thing. And every once in a while you look up and you're like, shit, what happened to me? What
Right.
was it like for you going from that high of highs, managing these nightclubs, all these celebrities, to like schlepping, putting together a dive bar? I mean, sure, there must have been times where you're like mopping the floor or cleaning the toilet or something, and you're like, what did I do?
Oh, see, for me, that was the next venture, was when I got into fine dining because
Okay, so you go, that
nothing
was
translated.
okay, okay. So
So
the
I
so the dive bar wasn't as much of a jump as the switching to fine
No,
dining.
going into
Okay.
fine dining, I had a 900 square foot bar on Hollywood Boulevard that printed money. And then I went to a 6,000 square foot, 2-story fine dining restaurant. And I literally never worked in a restaurant a day in my life. I
Mm,
came exclusively at a nightclub
mm,
before opening this thing. And so when I talk about being a victim of my own success, it's that hubris that comes from, you know, how could I fail?
hmm.
Everything I touch turns to gold. And that thing lost $250,000 its first year in business.
Oh my gosh, wow. So
It
do you
was
have
horrible.
investors for this, or was it all
I
your own
did.
money? You
I
did.
did.
Yeah.
And some of my own money as
And what are
well.
you thinking at the end of that year as you've lost all that money? And it sounds like it was more evident to you than it was with the clothing line where you have these payment terms and you're not sure what your profitability is.
Oh, it was brutal. I mean, and on top of it, we were doing a terrible job. So it's not like people enjoyed the food and beverage or they enjoyed the experience. We were constantly scrambling. And, if you were to ask me to define success at the lowest point, it would be breaking even and not apologizing to someone,
Mm,
which is not where you want to be.
right, right,
And
right.
so
So how'd you
that's,
turn it around?
I took over and I just became a student of the game.
Mm,
And so it became more about learning the fundamentals of fine dining, meeting the expectations of an entirely new audience. And I got very lucky. I fired the executive chef and brought in a new executive chef who ultimately became one of my partners in that project. Um, he was a very experienced chef who was generous with the wisdom that he had. And he taught me so much of what served me well as an operator in fine dining.
And the fine dining restaurant, was it a New Orleans theme?
So they were all Southern in nature. I'm a one
Okay.
trick pony. Um,
Well, talk about that. I mean, do you think that that differentiation helped also? Because there, I live in San Francisco, you live in San Diego, and there are Southern fine dining restaurants. There are some, but not a lot. It's different in the fine dining world. So was it very different? Did it help to differentiate you?
I mean, I think a lesson that applies to everyone in business was what we learned was like for us, the what do they say? The riches don't exist in niches. We
Mm,
launched as Cajun and Creole.
mm.
And we captured 100% of the demand that existed for that. Unfortunately, in Los Angeles, it was like 18 people. And I've got 20, right? And my
Yeah.
lease rate is $21,000 a month.
So you
So
expanded into more
we went
southern then.
broad.
Okay.
We
Okay.
went from Cajun and Creole to Southern to New American, ultimately to American cuisine. And
Yeah.
then once I got your attention, I could niche down. Um,
Mm,
but it was about creating a wide enough top of funnel that once you were in, we could then effectively differentiate. And I think
yeah.
that's a mistake a lot of people make. Like
Yeah. And
no
when
one's out looking for Cajun and Creole food. But if you're right, but if you're
yeah.
looking for American food, this might work for you.
And when you were going through this struggle, this first year, 2 years, when you're trying to get the traction, I don't know what years this was, but now today we've got Yelp, we've got all these different review sites, and many of these restaurants are victim to these things. I've seen restaurants start and then totally rebrand 3 months later because they got a ton of bad reviews and they just can't continue to exist with all those bad reviews. Was the landscape a lot different back then? Did you
No, it was
or
the same. I
it
mean,
was
look,
okay.
I don't want you to think that, like, when I took the helm, we turned this thing around in 6 weeks or in 6 months. I
Yeah.
still spent a year apologizing. I was just spending a year apologizing for what we did the year prior. I reached out. I mean, thank God I didn't need to rebrand. I reached out to everyone that left a bad review. And I was
Mm,
like, you're not wrong.
mm.
Here's what I would like for you to do. I'd like you to bring in the same people and I want you to come in for dinner and I'm going to pay for it.
Wow. Really? Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Look,
And what was that like when like diners came back in? They're like, I got this message on Yelp from this guy who says that he owns it and he's going to pay for my meal. Really?
yeah, for sure. That's
Wow.
exactly what it was. Look, I think you do a good job, you get paid. You do a bad job, which we did an objectively bad job, we'll pay.
Mm,
I just,
yeah.
I think that people that are passionate about food are foodies. People that are
Hmm.
passionate about people open restaurants. And I
Mm,
never took a single bad review with a grain of salt. Every bad review is truth to them.
mm,
That is their truth. And they so true, in fact, that they took time out of their day to talk shit about you online.
mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, if I failed to meet your expectation, regardless of where your expectations were, I'm sorry.
Mm,
Now, I'm not sorry that you have a gutter palate. I'm not sorry that you don't get what we're trying to do here, but I am sorry that, like, you came to me in good faith and either I failed to set the right expectation or I failed to meet the expectation established.
mm, mm.
And I think that's a great takeaway for all of the businesses I've been a part of, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I want to take a little bit of a detour here because you eventually became president of the California Restaurant Association,
I
which
did.
how many restaurants are there in California?
22,000 are members of the organization.
That is insane. What was that like representing? I mean, that takes a heavy level of involvement to get to that point. But what was it like representing 22,000 restaurants? I mean, imagine you're like talking to legislators and things like that.
Like, and if you could imagine, this was like 2020 to almost 2022.
Oh,
um,
COVID
so
time. Wow.
not the best
Wow.
time to be at the helm.
Oh man, what
But
was
people
that
were
like?
busy. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And it
Would
was
would
honestly
Josh in 2020 have said that too, or you say it's amazing?
both.
Okay, all right.
So at the top of 2020, I sold my restaurant group.
Yeah, and then
Um,
that was the other thing I was going to ask about is like so you're representing the restaurant association, but all at the same time you sell off your
I sell
restaurant.
my restaurant group.
Yeah,
And then I decide because I didn't want to do it anymore. Like I knew what it was going to take to keep these things afloat. Some people doubled down. I wasn't one of those guys.
yeah.
I had the entire group in escrow and sold by May of 2020.
You sold them all together.
Yeah, I sold them individually,
Oh, you did. Okay, yeah. Because
but
fine dining was one of those categories that really struggled because they couldn't do any takeout. They had
but
no
the
no
concept that
delivery.
took it over thought they were going to be open in 60 days.
Mm, hmm,
Right. And
yeah.
they got this amazing location with this studied past. I gave them the recipes. I gave them the branding. I sold everything.
All that
Because
because you were
they
just
thought they were
done.
getting a turnkey $5 million a year business,
Mm.
which
Hmm.
didn't end up opening for another, I think, 16, 17 months.
Oh,
Oh,
brutal.
yeah, it was brutal.
Wow. Wow. And
I was out
it would
and,
just dragged you down, I imagine.
oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was already burnt out anyway. And
Yeah.
what I was interested in at the time was really impact. I'm sure
Mm.
many of us, I'm sure many of the people listening, you fancy yourself a thought leader. I
Yeah.
just thought I had interesting ideas. I thought I saw the world differently. I thought I saw my industry differently.
Let's
Um,
get to I want to get to the podcast you end up starting in partnership with Yelp, but before we do that, California Restaurant Association. So you're, I imagine you sell off your restaurant group at the same time you're advocating, I imagine, for the restaurants to give
restaurants,
them
yeah,
greater leniency
22,000 restaurants.
to allow them to open up because many of them were being forced to shutter during this period of time. Talk a little bit about that, those conversations and what that was like.
So I'll start by saying I think most politicians are well-meaning. Having said that, like they lack deep understanding of, great example. I
Yeah.
think that in almost any industry, most of what they prescribe, most of the changes they want to make to our industry would make sense, but not in our industry. Not when the margins are this thin, not when the workforce looks and behaves in the way that it does.
Mm.
And so you spend a lot of your time educating your base about what they need to watch out for, but you also spend a lot of time educating politicians about the nuances of our industry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You
And
know,
what was that? I imagine we have politicians who've been to a restaurant, but that doesn't mean they've worked in a restaurant. So was that a struggle to educate them on what it was like to manage and
sure,
run a restaurant? Yeah.
absolutely. There's a massive delta between uh, the life within a restaurant and the life of a restaurateur.
Mm.
And so just because you own a beautiful, nice restaurant doesn't mean you own a beautiful, nice home.
Mm.
And so being able to separate the two and explain, like, this is what it's like to run these things. These are what the statistics look like.
Mm.
It's one thing to know that like 8 of 10 restaurants fail in the first 5 years. It's another thing to meet the restaurateurs that are struggling.
Mm.
That number also negates everyone that's breaking even every year that just keeps it going for a couple of decades.
Yeah. 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 You hear about that all the time. Yeah.
You do.
What is it behind the fundamentals of restaurants that you hear this all the time that the restaurants have super thin margins? Well, why is it?
It's because you're in a commodity business. So people are willing to pay for food and beverage, but they're not necessarily willing to pay for eating and drinking. And that's really where the premium comes in. So when you look at the burger on your plate and you say, why is this burger and fries $26? It's not. The chair that you're sitting in the building that you're in, right? And the labor associated with getting this done. Our first employee for a fine dining restaurant, our first employee arrived at the restaurant at 5:30 in the morning for a 6 p.m. dinner service.
Wow.
That is what's required in a scratch kitchen. And I think that the hurdle from a restaurateur's perspective is that if we're doing it right, it seems effortless. And so without seeing the effort that goes into an effortless process, you think,
well, I'm paying $150 for this meal that looks like I could have done it when they don't realize how hard it is.
Right. You look at the burger and you say, I could make this at home. To which I would say, make 1,000 of them at home, John, and then call me.
Right. And serve them hot to people when they expect it within, whatever it is, 12 and 14 minutes from when their butt was in the seat. Yeah.
Absolutely. We would have I love my people from Louisiana. And when you're serving cultural food, you're not competing against other restaurants in that cuisine. You're competing against uncles and aunts and grandmothers because that's how they remember gumbo and etouffee and jambalaya and all of these things. And people would pop their head in the kitchen and they'd say, my grandmother makes better gumbo. To which I would say, let's get her on the line. Let's see her push through 1,500 covers tonight and let's see how she does.
Yeah, right. One is fine, right?
Sure.
Well, let's get to you sell the restaurant empire and you decide that you had a relationship with Yelp. I'm not sure what that relationship it was, but you decided to partner with them to create some media, create a podcast, which a lot of people did at the start of the pandemic. Talk a little bit about that idea, because again, another complete pivot for you in your career.
Yes. So I had started in the winter of 2019. I created a
Okay.
short video series that I had done nothing with.
Hmm.
I just shot it, and I was friends with one of the executives over at Yelp. And we had gotten coffee like once a month, no expectations. He wanted to get closer with restaurateurs. He was a former restaurateur himself, and I just thought he was an interesting guy. So we met. The pandemic hits, everything gets shut down, and he checks in on me. He goes, "How are you doing?" And I said, "I'm good." And he goes, "What are you thinking about doing?" And I said, "Well, I guess I'll get into the thought leadership space." And he goes, "Those full comp videos that you made, I sent those to a couple other guys and we're interested in doing media. What do you think it could look like?" And I told him I was obsessed with the idea of doing a show, because you need context. Like
Hmm.
if I just called you on the phone, John, and asked you a bunch of intimate questions about your business, you're going to give me a restraining order,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
But if I'm like, "Hey, John, I have a podcast," and I ask the same exact
Yep.
questions, the context proves out the model. So I wanted to do a show. And an artist would tell you, "I don't care if anyone listens. If I'm able to impact one person's life, then it's all worth it."
Hmm.
I've never been that guy. I never wanted to scream into the abyss. So I turned to Yelp and I said, "You have audience and no content. I'm creating content with no audience." And it created this beautiful, meaningful strategic partnership where we were working collaboratively to create world class content. Hands were off. They let me say what I want to say, interview who I want to interview, do what I want to do. And then they would push it out to 250,000 restaurant owners and operators that had claimed their Yelp for Business profile.
Amazing. Wow. What did they get out of it? Is it just like the good quality content that they can share with their community?
So you think about Yelp, which is $1 billion publicly traded company, and you think this ubiquitous thing needs nothing. But I wasn't working with Yelp. I was working with this small startup within Yelp called Yelp for Restaurants.
Mm.
And it started out as this like little singular product, a couple of professional marketers, and a bunch of former restaurateurs. And so this tiny division within Yelp was looking to create an impact, looking to differentiate, looking to specialize, looking to make a name for themselves within this highly competitive industry. And that's who I worked with. So
Mm.
it was great because I went from working with restaurant people to working with restaurant people on this thing that we were all super passionate about.
And it allowed them to kind of get the word out about this product, this new startup idea within the larger Yelp ecosystem.
Exactly.
What has it been like for you? I know you've had a bunch of celebrity chefs and amazing restaurateurs on the show. What has it been like for you as a former restaurateur now to have these conversations with these incredibly successful restaurateurs?
Oh my God. I mean, it's you do it for a living as well. So I'm sure you can appreciate it, but it is like your childhood dream or your adult dream like come to fruition to sit across from. And look, not just like the brightest minds in my industry. Like I've interviewed Seth Godin and Robert Greene from the 48 Laws of Power and Grant Cardone and all of these different people that I was interested in, that I was curious about, that I had specific questions I want to ask, and to be able to sit across from them, to not only engage them in conversation that they seem interested in, which is super flattering, but also to be able to walk away with actionable information. I mean, it's been transformative. It's made me a better restaurateur after the fact.
Yeah, yeah, that's so cool. It's amazing to be able to have those types of conversations with people, and sometimes you're just pinching yourself, like I can't believe I get
For
to ask
sure.
this person questions that I'm curious about here. Yeah,
Dude, John, I get
yeah.
on the I get on the call with Seth Godin, and the first question I asked him, I was like, "Why did you choose me?" Because I just cold emailed him. And I was like, "Why did like I need to know? I need
Yeah.
to know what it was that I said that did it." And he was like, "That's not really germane to the conversation. Let's move on." And I was like, "Okay,
I withdraw the question. I apologize.
right. I didn't mean it. I wasn't looking for a hug. Let's keep going."
That
I was
doesn't
looking
seem
for a
like
hug.
it seems like a fairly innocuous question to me. So I don't know. Maybe he didn't like it. The guy's been interviewed a lot. Maybe he's like, come on, move on, get to the meat
Right.
of
He
the
was
question.
like, "Let's just do this thing."
Very cool. Now you also created you call it restaurant marketing school. It's
The restaurant scaling system is
that's
actually like that. It is the productized coaching and consulting platform.
okay. Yeah. So talk about that idea behind it.
So as it relates to thought leadership and all of this, the idea was, what's the old marketing phrase? Like, what can you do with an audience? Anything you
Mm-hmm.
want.
Hmm.
So once I had achieved audience, right, and I had like this massive following, they
Yeah.
were like, "So what do you have to sell me?"
Yeah.
And I had nothing to sell. So what I did is I signed up for a mastermind that would teach you how to codify what you know. That mastermind was called Black Belt. Nothing but good things to say about it and Taki Moore. They're
Mm-hmm.
brilliant. And so I learned how to codify what I know and how to effectively coach in a group coaching model. And then I took that to marketing or to market. And I can tell you, you learn by doing, but you also learn by teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that I have become an exponentially better restaurateur since no longer actively operating restaurants than I ever was as a restaurateur because I am able to ideate and iterate across more than 100 restaurants simultaneously.
Mm. And were there any beliefs where once you got into this teaching kind of challenged your belief? Like you mentioned earlier, the idea the riches isn't in the niches. That was one example. But are there any other beliefs that you had, fundamental beliefs that were kind of rocked by getting into teaching this?
Yes, if you can envision a scenario where like you get into something and you build an entire thing out, believing that like no one's going to be into this stuff, no one's going to want to do this. When it comes to consulting, like the most popular models are done for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then the next most popular is done with you, and then the third is you do it.
Yeah.
I'm vested in the world at marketing. I think, especially as it relates to my industry, there are few, if any, that are better than me at what I do for a living. But I'm not going to do it for you because there's no value in that. And every other consultant I had ever worked with throughout my career attempted to immobilize me. They didn't want me to know what they were doing or how they were doing. They just wanted to do it for me and create some level of dependency.
Mm.
And I just didn't want that. So the model that I created was like, you do it. I'll help you do it. And if you hit roadblocks, I'll help you overcome them. But like, you need to learn these skills and you can't delegate it out until you've mastered it yourself, because that's the framework that served me well.
Mm.
And so that's what I built, believing that people that work 80 to 100 hours a week would have absolutely no interest in doing what I'm offering. But as it turns out, people were ravenous, that they wanted to be told what to do and they wanted to learn the skills and they didn't want it done for them.
I'm curious, are there any examples that come to mind of clients you've worked with or restaurants you've worked with where they came in and they were struggling and they didn't know how to market that restaurant? Like any examples you can give of, how you help them through that, how to get attention for their restaurant today?
Absolutely. So I'll supply you with the framework, which I think would be useful for anyone in any industry. There are only three pillars to the program. And I could cite 100 examples of how people turned around their businesses, how they doubled and tripled revenues and all of this. But in my mind, there are only three pillars. And the first is profitability. Like, are you running the most profitable version of your business today? In full transparency, I only work with businesses that are doing at least $500,000 in revenue a year. So, because if you've hit that, we then get into the next pillar, which is awareness. So once I've helped you achieve profitability at whatever your current sales volume is, then it makes more sense to try and drive new traffic. Now, awareness for me really only consists of two things, right? And I think this is the true for everyone. If you're not getting enough new customers, it's either due to a product market fit issue or an awareness issue. There's nothing else it could possibly be. Either everybody knows and nobody cares, or nobody knows, but if they cared, they would come. And so we figure out which one it is. Sometimes we're massaging product market fit slightly, ever so slightly. But again, if you're doing $500,000 a year in the restaurant business, there is some degree of product market fit there. And so then we scale awareness and we do it through storytelling. I think by and large, social media is used the wrong way. And so I teach them a very prescriptive way to use social media in a way that creates massive conversion in addition to massive awareness. And then the third step is customer frequency, which I think is true for all of us. In my industry, it's, what if the infrequent people came once a month? And what if the once a month people came twice a month? And it's something nobody ever focuses on. What I find amazing is people will ignore their best customers to try and get this proverbial new customer that they don't even know.
I think that's true in many industries where people, it's kind of more exciting to go after the people that they don't know rather than the people that have been dining there once a week, every week for years in many cases. Sure. Yeah. And what are some of the levers that people can pull on for customer frequency these days?
So for me, so you've read the book, the marketing book, Influence?
Yeah, Robert Cialdini, yeah.
Yep. So like one of the greatest things that I took away from that book was this idea that people just need a reason. They just need a reason to act. It doesn't matter what the reason is. The reason doesn't need to be a good reason. They just need a reason to act. And so what I have seen in when it comes to customer frequency is that you look at a restaurant's newsletter, and we all receive restaurant newsletters, and it's about awareness, right? We're doing this and this and this and this and this. Come to any one of these things. And so what do? You delete the newsletter and you don't go to any of them. I believe that most people, regardless of industry, have a messaging problem, a focus problem as it's related to their marketing. And they're always trying to sell the things that aren't selling well instead of trying to double down on selling the things that are selling well. So like when my restaurants, and they see massive conversion as a result, when they send a newsletter, that newsletter has 3 reasons to come in for dinner this weekend. I'm not trying to get you in on Tuesday when you don't actually want to go in. I'm just saying, if you're already going out this weekend, here are 3 great reasons to choose us with a singular call to action. Click here to book. And so it's the focus in marketing. I've never gone into anyone's business and like built out their marketing. It's always been about pulling away the non-essential, leaving them only with a focused message which directly relates to an action.
Yeah. That's great. Josh, this has been really interesting. I'd love to wrap up with my gratitude question. So I'm a big fan of giving my guests a little space to acknowledge people that have helped them along the way in their journey, especially peers or contemporaries. Anyone in particular you'd want to shout out and thank?
I always think about this guy, Gerald Franks. So if you could flash back like 30 years at this point, I just moved to Los Angeles. Before the days of nightclubs and all of that, I mean, Kinko's Xeroxing resumes to go drop off at bars. And this guy walks in with one of those 24-hour fitness gym boxes, enter here to win a year-long membership. And I turned to him and I said, hey, are you guys hiring? And he goes, you have an accent. Where are you from? And I said, I'm from Baton Rouge. And he goes, oh, my whole family's from Mississippi. What are you looking to do? And I said, I'd love to be a personal trainer. I've thought I could be good at it. I don't have any certifications. He goes, oh, well, they'll certify you as a trainer. You seem like a nice guy. Come in tomorrow. I'll tell the manager that you and I are close friends and I've known you my whole life, and she'll hire you. Little did I know that there were like 8 24-hour fitnesses in Los Angeles at the time. So I kept ping-ponging from one to the next until ultimately I found him at one, and he did exactly that. And it was through that job that I met the door guy at the nightclub that I ultimately ran, which is where I met the designer that I started my clothing line with. And it was through that clothing line that I met my business partners that I opened the bar with, and the rest is history. But it all started with Gerald's generosity. And
just sticking out your hand and introducing yourself to someone in line at Kinko's and striking up a conversation with them. That's so cool. I love that story. Josh, where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you and check out the full Comp podcast?
Go to joshkopel.com for all things me.
Awesome. Josh, thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.